I'm Brittany. This is Arthur. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. We are continuing through Captive Prince, Book 1, which is also called Captive Prince. And we've learned certain things now. We have a certain amount of information at our disposal and can now have broader discussions about certain characters. And yeah. That was the first mic drop was in the last stream, I feel, which is saying something because I feel like there's technically quite a bit of mic drops throughout, as we explore Vare and the Vare court and every awful thing about it. We got our first real mic drop at the last one. And that's so literally only the beginning that I can't even describe. I mean, I can't. It would be spoilers. So, we read for a couple of hours. We take a break somewhere around in the middle. Please no spoilers in the chat because there are plenty of people here who have not read this before. I, having read this before, will also be doing my absolute level best to only discuss things as they come up and not, just spoiling everything ahead of time. So we are indeed spoiler averse here. Janae is in the chat. Janae Henning, lovely friend of the channel with her own channel. If you are even remotely into East Asian media, you should hop over to Janae Henning and give her a follow. She is delightful. Hey Janae, I've been meaning to get back to your message on Discord for several days now. It's going to happen today. I swear. It's the ADHD thing, So we are on page 179 for chapter 10, immediately following a rather sickening reveal about who the 13-year-old pet Nikay's actually belongs to. Going from there, Damon had survived summonses from Luron before. He had no reason for the tension across his shoulders, the anxiety in his stomach, curled and hot. His journey was made in total privacy, giving the false outward impression of a secret rendezvous. But whatever this looked like, whatever it felt like, whatever he'd been told, was wrong. If he thought about it too much, hysteria threatened. Luron was not the type to smuggle men into his rooms for midnight assignations. That wasn't what this was. It didn't make sense, but Luron was impossible to second-guess. Damon's eyes raked the passageway and found another inconsistency. Where were the guards who had held position all along these corridors the last time Damon had walked them? Did they stand down at night, or had they been cleared out for a reason? Did he use those words? His bed? What else did he say? Damon asked, and received no answer. The knife at his back pricked him forward. There was nothing to do but continue along the corridor. With every step he took, the tension tightened, the uneasiness increased. The grilled windows along the passage threw squares of moonlight that passed over the faces of his escort. No sound but their footsteps. There was a thin line of light under the doors of Luron's room. There was only one guard at the door, a dark-haired man wearing the prince's livery and, at his hip, a sword. He nodded at his two fellows and said briefly, "He's inside." They stopped long enough at the door to unlock the chain and free Damon completely. The chain dropped in a heavy coil and was simply left there on the floor. Maybe he knew then. The doors were pushed open. Luron was on the reclining couch, his feet tucked up under him in a relaxed, boyish posture. A book of scroll-worked pages was open before him. There was a goblet on the small table beside him. At some point during the night, a servant must have spent the requisite half-hour unlacing his austere outer garments, for Luron wore only pants and a white shirt, the material so fine it did not require embroidery to declaim its expense. The room was lamplit. Luron's body was a series of graceful lines under the shirt's soft folds. Damon's eyes lifted to the white column of his throat, and above that the golden hair, parting around the shell cup of an unjeweled ear. The image was, Damascened? There's something about mask in there. Damascened? Huh. Yet another word to write down. D-A-M-A. Yeah, D-A-M-A-S-C-E-N-E-D. I've never seen that before. And I've read this before. You would think. The image was... Demasoned is the closest, potentially, as beaten metal. He was reading. He looked up when the doors opened, and blinked as though refocusing his blue eyes was difficult. Damon looked again at the goblet and recalled that he had seen Luron once before with his senses blurred by alcohol. It might have prolonged the illusion of an assignation a few seconds longer, because Luron, drunk, was surely capable of all kinds of mad demands and unpredictable behavior. Except that it was perfectly clear from the first moment he looked up that Luron was not expecting company, and that Luron did not recognize the guards either. Luron carefully closed the book and rose. "Couldn't sleep," said Luron. As he spoke, he came to stand before the open archway of the loggia. Damon wasn't sure that a straight 2-story drop into unlit gardens could be counted as an escape route, but certainly otherwise, with the 3 shallow steps leading up to where he stood, the small, finely carved table and decorative objects all providing a series of obstacles, it was, tactically, the best position in the room. Luron knew what was happening. Damon, who had seen the long, empty corridor, dark and quiet and absent of men, knew also. The guard at the door had entered behind them. There were 3 men, all armed. "I don't think the prince is in an amorous mood," said Damon, neutrally. "I take a while to warm up," said Luron. And then it was happening, as though on cue, the sound of a sword being unsheathed to his left. Later, he'd wonder what it was that caused him to react as he did. He had no love for Luron. Given time to think, he would surely have said in a hardened voice that the internal politics of Vere weren't his business, and that whatever acts of violence Luron had brought down upon himself were thoroughly deserved. Maybe it was bizarre empathy, because he'd lived through something like this, the betrayal of it, violence in a place he'd thought was safe. Maybe it was a way of reliving those moments, of repairing his failure because he had not reacted as quickly as he should have then. It must have been that. It must have been the echo of that night, all the chaos and the emotion of it, that he had locked up behind closed doors. The 3 men split their attention. 2 of them moved towards Luron, while the third remained with a knife, guarding Damon. He obviously expected no trouble. His grip on the knife was slack and casual. After days, weeks spent waiting for an opportunity, it felt good to have one, and to take it. To feel the heavy, satisfying impact of flesh on flesh and the blow that numbed the man's arm and caused him to drop the knife. The man was wearing livery and not armor. A blunder. His whole body curved around Damon's fist as it drove into his abdomen, and he made a guttural sound that was half a choke for air, half a response to pain. The second of the 3 men, swearing, turned back, presumably deciding that 1 man was enough to dispatch the prince, and that his attention was better spent subduing the unexpectedly troublesome barbarian. Unfortunately for him, he thought just having a sword would be enough. He came in fast, rather than approaching cautiously. His 2-handed sword, with its large grip, could cleave into a man's side and go some way towards cutting him in half, but Damon was already inside his guard and in grappling distance. There was a crash on the far side of the room, but Damon was only distantly aware of it, all his attention on the task of immobilizing the second of his assailants, no thought to spare on the 3rd man and Luron. The swordsman in his grip gasped out, "He's the prince's bitch, kill him!" which was all the warning Damon needed to move. He swung his entire body weight against the swordsman, reversing their positions, and the knife stroke meant for him ran into the swordsman's unarmored sternum. The man with the knife had pulled himself up and recovered his weapon. He was agile, with a scar running down his cheek under the beard, a survivor. Not someone Damon wanted darting around him with a knife. Damon didn't let him pull his knife from its grisly sheath, but pushed forward, so that the man stumbled backwards, his fingers opening. Then he simply took hold of the man at hip and shoulder and swung his body hard into the wall. It was enough to leave him dazed, his features slackened, unable to muster any initial resistance when Damon restrained him in a hold. This done, Damon looked over, half expecting to see Luron struggling or overcome. He was surprised to see instead that Luron was alive and intact, having dispatched his opponent, and was rising from a position bent over the 3rd man's still form, relieving his dead fingers of a knife. He supposed that Luron had possessed, at the very least, the wits to utilize his surroundings. Damon's eyes caught on the knife. His gaze swung down to the dead swordsman. There, too, a knife. a serrated blade edge finished with the characteristic fretted hilt design of Sicyon, one of the northern provinces of Achelos. The knife Luron held was of the same design. It was bloody up to the hilt, he saw, as Luron descended the shallow steps. It looked incongruous in his hand, since his fine white shirt had survived the struggle in immaculate condition, and the lamplight was just as flattering to him as it had been before. Damon recognized Luron's cold, strapped-down expression. He didn't envy the man he held the interrogation. He didn't envy the man he held the interrogation that was coming. "What do you want me to do with him?" "Hold him still," said Luron. He came forward. Damon did as he was told. He felt the man make a renewed attempt to free himself. Damon simply tightened his grip, aborting the ripple of struggle. Luron lifted the serrated knife and, calmly as a butcher, sliced open the man's bearded throat. Damon heard the choked sound and felt the first spasms of the body within his grip. He let go, partly out of surprise, and the man's hands came up to his own throat in a hopeless, instinctive gesture. Too late. The thin red crescent drawn across his throat widened. He toppled. Damon didn't even think before he reacted. As Luron slanted a look at him, changing his grip on the knife, he moved instinctively to neutralize the threat. Body collided hard with body. Damon's grip closed on the fine bones of Luron's wrist, but instead of having things immediately his own way, he was surprised to encounter a moment of muscled resistance. He applied greater pressure. He felt the resistance in Luron's body pushed to its limit, though he was still far from his own. "Let go of my arm," said Luron in a controlled voice. "Drop the knife," said Damon. "If you do not let go of my arm," said Luron, "it will not go easily for you." Damon pushed just slightly harder, and felt the resistance shudder and give way. The knife clattered to the ground. As soon as it did, he let Luron go. In the same motion, Damon stepped backwards out of range. Instead of following him, Luron also took 2 steps backwards, widening the distance between himself and Damon. They stared at one another over the wreckage of the room. The knife lay between them. The man with the slit throat was dead or dying, his body gone and his head turned sideways. The blood had soaked through the livery he wore, blotting out the starburst device of gold on blue. Luron's struggles had not been as contained as Damon's. The table was knocked over, the shattered pieces of a fine ceramic were strewn across the floor, and the goblet rolled on the tile. A wall hanging had been partly torn down, and there was a great deal of blood. Luron's first kill of the night had been even messier than his second. Luron's breathing was shallow with exertion. So was Damon's. Into the tense, wary moment, Luron said, steadily, "You seem to vacillate between assistance and assault. Which is it?" "I'm not surprised you've driven 3 men to try and kill you. I'm only surprised there weren't more," said Damon bluntly. "There were," said Luron. "More." Understanding his meaning, Damon flushed. "I didn't volunteer. I was brought here, I don't know why." "To cooperate," said Luron. "Cooperate," said Damon with complete disgust. "You were unarmed." Damon remembered the lax way that man had held a knife on him. They had indeed expected him to cooperate, or at the very least stand by and watch. He frowned at the closest of the still faces. He disliked the idea that anyone at all believed him capable of cutting down an unarmed man 4-on-1, even if that man was Luron. We love integrity. You know? Just... Luron stared at him. "Like the man you just killed," said Damon, looking back at him. "In my part of the fight, the men were not helpfully killing each other," Luron said. Damon opened his mouth. Before he could speak, there was a sound from the corridor. They both instinctively squared off towards the bronze doors. The sound became the clatter of light armor and weaponry, and soldiers in the Regent's livery were pouring into the room, 2, 5, 7. The odds started to become daunting, but... "Your Highness, are you hurt?" "No," said Luron. The soldier in charge gestured to his men to secure the room, then to check the 3 lifeless bodies. "A servant found 2 of your men dead at the perimeter of your apartments. He ran immediately to the Regent's guard. Your own men have yet to be informed." "I gathered that," said Luron. They were rougher with Damon, manhandling him into a restraining grip like the ones he remembered from the early days of his capture. He surrendered to it, because what else could he do? He felt his hands pulled behind his back. A meaty hand clasped the back of his neck. "Take him," said the soldier. Luron spoke very calmly. "May I ask why you are arresting my servant?" The soldier in charge gave him an uncomprehending look. Your Highness, there was an attack. Not by him. The weapons are Achiellan, said one of the men. Your Highness, if there's been an Achiellan attack against you, you can bet this one's in on it. It was too neat by half. It was, Damon realized, exactly why the three assailants had brought him here. To be blamed. Of course, they would have expected to survive the encounter, but their intentions held all the same. And Luron, who spent his every waking moment searching for ways to have Damon humiliated, hurt, or killed, had just been given the excuse he needed handed to him on a platter. He could see, he could feel that Luron knew it. He could feel, too, how badly Luron wanted it, wanted to see him taken, wanted to trump both Damon and his uncle. He bitterly regretted the impulse that had led him to save Luron's life. You're misinformed, said Luron. He sounded like he was tasting something unpleasant. There has been no attack against me. These three men attacked the slave, claiming some sort of barbarian dispute. Damon blinked. They attacked the slave, said the soldier, who was apparently having almost as much difficulty digesting this information as Damon. Release him, soldier, Luron said. But the hands on him didn't let go. The Regent's men didn't take orders from Luron. The soldier in charge actually shook his head slightly at the man holding Damon, negating Luron's order. Forgive me, Your Highness, but until we can be sure of your safety, I would be negligent if I didn't— You've been negligent, said Luron. This statement, calmly delivered, caused a silence, which the soldier in charge weathered, flinching only a little. It was probably why he was in charge. The grip on Damon slackened noticeably. Four-dimensional chess, bitch. Luron said, You've arrived late and manhandled my property. By all means, compound your faults by arresting the goodwill gift of the King of Achielos against my orders. The hands on Damon lifted. Luron didn't wait for an acknowledgement from the soldier in charge. I require a moment of privacy. You can use the time until dawn to clear my apartments and inform my own men of the attack. I'll send for one of them when I'm ready. Yes, Your Highness, said the soldier in charge. As you wish. We'll leave you to your rooms. As the soldiers made the first movements toward leaving, Luron said, I assume I am to drag these three derelicts out myself? The soldier in charge flushed. We'll remove them, of course. Is there anything else you require from us? Haste, said Luron. The men complied. It was not long before the table was righted, the goblet returned to its place. The pieces of fine ceramic were swept into a neat pile. The bodies were removed, and the blood was mopped at, in most cases ineffectually. Damon had never before seen a half-dozen soldiers reduced to compliant housekeeping by the sheer force of one man's personal arrogance. It was almost instructive. Halfway through the proceedings, Luron stepped back to lean his shoulders against the wall. Finally, the men were gone. The room had been superficially righted, but had not been returned to its formal, tranquil beauty. It had the air of a sanctuary disturbed, but it was not only the atmosphere that was disrupted. There were tangible blots on the landscape, too. The men were soldiers, not house servants. They had missed more than one spot. Damon could feel the beat of his pulse, but he could not make sense of his own feelings, let alone of what had happened. The violence, the killing, and the bizarre lies that had followed had been too sudden. His eyes scrolled around the room, surveying the damage. His gaze snagged on Luron, who was watching him in return rather warily. Asking to be left alone for the rest of the night really didn't make much sense. Nothing that had happened tonight made any sense, but there was one thing that, while the soldiers performed their work, Damon had come slowly to realize. Luron's posture was perhaps slightly more exaggerated than his usual insouciant lean. Damon tipped his head to one side and gave Luron a long, scrutinizing look all the way down to his boots, then back up again. You're wounded. No. Damon didn't remove his gaze. Any man but Luron would have flushed or looked away or given some sign that he was lying. Damon half expected it, even from Luron. Luron returned the look, and then some. If you mean excluding your attempt to break my arm. I mean excluding my attempt to break your arm, said Damon. Luron was not, as Damon had first thought, drunk. But if you looked closely, he was controlling his breathing, and there was a faint, slightly, febrile? look in his eyes. Oh, thank you, C.S. Picot, once again, for teaching me something I don't know. Damon took a step forward. He stopped when he ran into a blue-eyed look like a wall. I would prefer you to stand further away, said Luron, each word finely chiseled, as though in marble. Damon swung his gaze over to the goblet that had been knocked over during the fight, its contents spilt. The Regent's men, unthinkingly, had righted it. When he looked back, he knew from Luron's expression that he was right. Not wounded. Poisoned, said Damon. You can restrain your delight. I am not going to die from it, said Luron. How do you know that? But Luron, delivering him a killing look, refused to elaborate. He told himself, feeling oddly detached, that it was no more than justice. Damon perfectly recalled the experience of being doused with a drug and then thrown into a fight. He wondered if the drug was Chalet. Could it be drunk as well as inhaled? It explained why the three men had been so casually assured of their own success in tackling Luron. It also laid the blame all the more firmly at his own feet, Damon realized. It was sordidly believable that he would revenge himself on Luron with the same tactics that Luron had thrown at him. This place sickened him. Anywhere else, you simply killed your enemy with a sword, or poisoned him if you had the honorless instincts of an assassin. Here, it was layer upon layer of constructed double-dealing, dark, polished, and unpleasant. He would have assumed tonight the product of Luron's own mind, if Luron were not so clearly the victim. What was really going on? Damon went over to the goblet and lifted it. A shallow slide of liquid remained in the cup. It was water, surprisingly, not wine. That was why the thin rim of pinked color on the inside of the cup was visible. It was the distinctive mark of a drug Damon knew well. It's a Nikay drug, said Damon. It's given to pleasure slaves during training. It makes them... I am aware of the effect of the drug, Luron said, in a voice like cut glass. Damon looked at Luron with new eyes. The drug in his own country was infamous. He had sampled it himself once, as a curious 16-year-old. He had taken only a fraction of a normal dose, and it had provided him with an embarrassment of virility for several hours, exhausting 3 cheerfully tumbled partners. He had not bothered with it since. A stronger dose led from virility to abandonment. To leave residue in the goblet, the amount had been generous, even if Luron had taken only a mouthful. Luron was hardly abandoned. He was not speaking with his usual ease, and his breathing was shallow, but these were the only signs. Damon realized suddenly that what he was witnessing was an exercise in sheer iron-willed self-control. It wears off, said Damon, adding, because he was not above enjoying the truth as a form of minor sadism, after a few hours. He could see in the look Luron leveled at him that Luron would rather have cut off his own arm than have anyone know about his condition, and further, that he was the last person Luron wished to know or be left alone with. Damon was not above enjoying that fact either. Think I'm going to take advantage of the situation, said Damon. Because the one thing that emerged clearly from whatever tangled Varetian plot had unfolded this evening was the fact that he was free of restraints, free of obligations, and unguarded for the first time since his arrival in this country. I am. It was good of you to clear your apartments, said Damon. I thought I'd never have the chance to get out of here. He turned. Behind him, Luron swore. Damon was halfway to the door before Luron's voice turned him back. Wait, said Luron, as though he forced the word out and hated saying it. It's too dangerous. Leaving now would be seen as an admission of guilt. The Regent's guard wouldn't hesitate to have you killed. I can't protect you as I am now. Protect me, said Damon, flat incredulity in his voice. I am aware that you saved my life. Damon just stared at him. Luron said, I dislike feeling indebted to you. Trust that, if you don't trust me. Trust you, said Damon. You flayed the skin from my back. I have seen you do nothing but cheat and lie to every person you've encountered. You use anything and anyone to further your own ends. You are the last person I would ever trust. Luron's head tipped backwards against the wall. His eyelids had dropped to half-mast. so that he regarded Damon through 2 golden-lashed slits. Damon was half expecting a denial, or an argument, but Luron's only reply was a breath of laughter, which strangely showed more than anything else how close to the edge he was. "Go, then." Damon looked again at the door. With the Regent's men on heightened alert, there was real danger, but escape would always mean risking everything. If he hesitated now and waited for another chance, if he managed to find a way out of the perpetual restraints, if he killed his guard or got past them some other way. Right now, Luron's apartments were empty. He had a head start. He knew a way out of the palace. A chance like this one might not come again for weeks or months or at all. Luron would be left alone and vulnerable in the aftermath of an attempt on his life. But the immediate danger was past, and Luron had lived through it. Others had not. Damon had killed tonight and witnessed killing. Damon set his jaw. Whatever debt was between them had been paid. He thought, I don't owe him anything. The door opened beneath his hand, and the corridor was empty. He went. That's the end of the chapter. Boy, I fucking tell you. That is one of my favorite sequences. Especially in the first book. The diabolical, the cruel fucking genius of C.S. Picot to give us a sex drug moment without giving us a sex drug moment walks the line of indulgent without breaking the story that she's built so far so perfectly. Because on one hand, it wouldn't make sense, really, once you like have the whole trilogy in perspective. It wouldn't make sense, really, for what we kind of don't want to happen in this circumstance to actually happen. It would throw things off of what she's trying to do. But just the it's in the air, you know it's a thing, but it doesn't happen. That is diabolical. Diabolical. There's only one word for it, and it's diabolical. She's sick and twisted. She's unhinged. She's brutally unfair. I hate her immensely. Whew. Exactly, Janae. Thank you. It's also, we would have been side-eyeing Damon. It would have been... I don't see how it would work out terribly well for our perceptions and opinions of the characters if it wound up any other way. But she dangled it. She dangled the possibility. Have you noticed that that's kind of like a recurring thing throughout this book so far? The possibility of things are dangled and then not actually done more than once. We're on page 195 for chapter 11. I love this book so much. He knew of only one sure way out, and that was through the courtyard from the first floor training area. He forced himself to walk calmly and purposefully, like a servant who has been sent on an errand for his master. His mind was full of slit throats and close fighting and knives. He pushed all of that down and thought instead about his path through the palace. The passage was empty at first. Passing his own room was strange. It had surprised him from the moment he'd been moved there how close his room was to Luron's, nestled inside Luron's own apartments. The doors were slightly ajar, as they had been left by the 3 men who now lay dead. It looked empty and wrong. Out of some instinct, perhaps an instinct to hide the telltale signs of his own escape, Damon stopped to close them. When he turned, there was someone watching him. Nikay was standing in the middle of the passage, as though brought up short on his way to Luron's bedchamber. Somewhere distant, the urge to laugh accompanied a spill of tight, ridiculous panic. If Nikay's reached it, if he sounded the alarm... Damon had prepared himself for fighting men, not small boys with frothy silken overrobes thrown on top of bedshirts. "What are you doing here?" said Damon, since one of them was going to say it. "I was sleeping. Someone came and woke us up. They told the Regent there had been an attack," said Nikay. "Us," thought Damon, sickly. Indeed, one moment... Oh, God. That doesn't get any better no matter how many times you read it. Ugh. Whew. Nikay took a step forward. Damon's stomach lurched, and he stepped forward into the corridor, blocking Nikay's path. He felt absurd. He said he ordered everyone out of his apartments. I wouldn't try to see him. "Why not?" Nikay said. He looked past Damon towards Luron's chamber. "What happened? Is he all right?" Damon thought of the most dissuasive argument he could make. "He's in a foul mood," he said briefly. If nothing else, it was accurate. "Oh," said Nikay, and then, "I don't care. I just wanted to..." But then he lapsed into a weird silence, just staring at Damon without trying to get past him. What was he doing here? Every moment Damon spent with Nikay was a moment in which Luron could emerge from his chambers, or the guard could return. He felt the seconds of his life ticking past. Nikay lifted his chin and announced, "I don't care. I'm going back to bed." Except that he was just standing there, all brown curls and blue eyes, light from the occasional torches falling on every perfect plane of his face. "Well, go on," said Damon. More silence. There was obviously something on Nikay's mind, and he wouldn't leave until he said it. Eventually, "Don't tell him I came." "I won't," said Damon, with complete truthfulness. Once out of the palace, he didn't intend to see Luron ever again. More silence. Nikay's smooth brow corrugated. Finally, he turned and disappeared back down the passage. That's a scene break. Whew, I forgot about that. Oh, shit. Oh, man. Oh, fuck. Also, can I just say, as for describing a furrowed brow, a smooth brow corrugating, maybe this is used frequently and I just haven't seen it, but that is a genius way to express a furrowed brow without saying furrowed brow. I've never been able, but there's like, in my head, there was only one way to frickin' say furrowed brow. But no, apparently not. Anyway. Then, came the command, "Stop." He stopped. Luron had ordered that his apartments be left empty, but Damon had reached the perimeter now and faced the Regent's guard. He said, as calmly as he could, "The prince sent me to fetch 2 men of his own guard to him. I assume they've been alerted." So much could go wrong. Even if they did not stop him, they could send an escort with him. A hint of suspicion was all it would take. The guard said, "Our orders are no one in or out." "You can tell the prince that," said Damon, "after you tell him you let through the Regent's pet." Ha! No. Woo! You forget that Damon is not without a sharp tongue in a specific way under certain circumstances, because Luron is standing right there. You just forget, man. But woo! That got a flicker of a reaction. Invoking Luron's bad mood was like a magical key, unlocking the most forbidding doors. "Get on with it," said the guard. Damon nodded and walked away at a normal pace, feeling their eyes on his back. He couldn't relax, even when he got out of sight. He was continually aware of the palace activity around him as he walked. He passed 2 servants who ignored him. He prayed that the training hall would be as he remembered it, remote, unguarded, and empty. Another scene break. It was. He felt a rush of relief when he saw it, with its older fittings and sawdust scattered across the floor. In the center stood the cross, a dark, solid bulk. Damon felt an aversion to going near it. his instinct to skirt around the periphery of the room rather than walk across it openly. Disliking this reaction so much in himself, he deliberately took a precious few moments to walk over to the cross, to place a hand on the solid center beam. He felt the immovable wood beneath his hand. He had somehow expected to see the quilted covering, darkened by sweat or blood, some sign of what had happened, but there was nothing. He looked up at the place where Luron had stood and watched him. There was no reason to have laced Luron's drink with that particular drug, if the intent had been only to incapacitate. Rape, therefore, was to have preceded murder. Damon had no idea whether he'd been intended as a participant or merely an observer. Both ideas sickened him. His own fate, as the supposed perpetrator, would probably have been even more drawn out than Luron's, a long, lingering execution before crowds. Drugs and a trio of assailants, a scapegoat brought in for the sacrifice, a servant running to inform the Regent's guard at just the right time. It was a thorough plan, rendered shoddy by a failure to predict how Damon himself would react, and by underestimating Luron's adamantine will resisting the drug, and by being overly elaborate, but that was a common failing of the Venetian mind. Damon told himself that Luron's current predicament was not so terrible. In a court like this, Luron could simply summon a pet to help relieve him of his difficulties. It was stubbornness if he didn't. He didn't have time for this. He left the cross. On the sidelines of the training area, close to one of the benches, there were a few mismatched pieces of armor and a few pieces of old, discarded clothing. He was glad they were here, as he had remembered, because outside the palace he would not go unnoticed in flimsy slave garments. Thanks to his close instruction in the baths, he was familiar with the foolish idiosyncrasies thank you, of Venetian clothing and could dress quickly. The pants were very old, and the fawn-colored fabric was worn threadbare in places, but they fit. The ties were two long, thin strips of softened leather. He looked down while hurriedly tying and tightening them. They served both to close and the open V and to create an external crisscross of ornamentation. The shirt didn't fit, but since it was in an even worse state of disrepair than the pants, with one of the sleeve seams already coming open along the join between sleeve and shoulder, it was easy to quickly tear the arms off, then tear a split in the collar until it did fit. It was otherwise loose enough. It would cover the telltale scars on his back. He discarded his slave garments, hiding them out of the way behind the bench. The armor pieces were uniformly useless, consisting as they did of a helm, a rusted breastplate, a single shoulder guard, and a few belts and buckles. A leather vambrace would have helped to hide his gold cuffs. It was a shame there weren't any. It was a shame there were no weapons. He couldn't afford to look for other armaments. Too much time had passed already. He headed for the roof. That's another scene break. The palace did not make things easy for him. There was no friendly route up and over, leading to a painless first-story descent. The courtyard was surrounded by higher edifices that must be climbed. Still, he was lucky this was not the palace at Ios or any Achaean stronghold. Ios was a fortification, built on the cliffs, designed to repel intruders. There was no unguarded way down, excluding a beetling vertical drop of smooth white stone. The Venetian palace, afroth with ornament, paid only lip service to defense. The parapets were purposeless curving decorative spires. The slippery domes that he skirted would be a nightmare in an attack, hiding one part of the roof from the other. Once Damon used a macholocation as a handhold, but it seemed to have no function besides ornament. This was a place of residence, not a fort or a castle built to resist an army. Ver had fought its share of wars, its borders drawn and redrawn, but for 200 years there had been no foreign army in the capital. The old defensive keep at Chester-Yon had been replaced, the court moving north to this new nest of luxury. At the first sound of voices, he flattened himself against a parapet and thought, only two, judging from the sounds of their feet and the voices. Only two meant he could still succeed, if he could do it quietly, if they did not sound an alarm. His pulse quickened. Their voices seemed casual, as though they were here for some routine reason rather than part of a search party hunting down a lost prisoner. Damon waited, tense, and their voices grew distant. The moon was up. To the right, the river Serein, which oriented him, west. The town was a series of dark shapes with edges picked out in moonlight. Sloping roofs and gables, balconies and gutters met one another in a chaotic shadowed jumble. Behind him, the far-flung darkness of what must be the great northern forests. And to the south, past the dark shapes of the city, past the lightly wooded hills and rich central provinces of Vere, lay the border, prickling with true castles, Ravenel, Fortaine, Marlay, and across the border Delpha, and home. Home. Home, though the Achielos had left behind him, was not the Achielos he would return to. His father's reign was ended, and it was Castor who was at this moment lay sleeping in the king's chamber, with Jocaste beside him, if she had not yet begun her lying in. Jocaste, her waist thickening with Castor's child. He took a steadying breath. His luck held. There was no sound of alarm from the palace, no search party on the roof or on the streets. His escape was unnoticed, and there was a way down if he were prepared to climb. It would feel good to test his physicality, to pit himself against an arduous challenge. When he had first arrived in Vere, he had been in peak condition, and staying fight-ready was something that he had worked at during long hours of confinement in which there was little else to do. But several weeks of slow recuperation from the lash had taken a toll. Tussling with 2 men of mediocre training was one thing. Scaling a wall was something else altogether, a feat of stamina that drew continually on upper arm strength and the muscles of the back. His weakness, newly healed and untested. He was unsure how much continual strain it could stand before muscle strength gave out. One way to find out. Night would provide a cover for descent, but after that, night was not a good time to move through the streets of a city. Perhaps there was a curfew, or perhaps it was simply the custom here, but the streets of Arles looked empty and silent. One man creeping around at street level would stand out. By contrast, the gray light of dawn, with its accompanying bustle of activity, would be a perfect time for him to find his way out of the city. Perhaps he could even move earlier. An hour or so before dawn was an active time in any town. But he had to get down first. After that, a darkened corner of the town, an alleyway, or, back permitting, a rooftop, would be an ideal place to wait until the bustle of morning came. He was thankful that the men on the palace roofs were gone, and the patrols were not yet out. A scene break. The patrols were out. The Regent's guard burst out of the palace, mounted and carrying torches, only minutes after Damon's feet first touched the ground. 24 men on horses, split into 2 groups, exactly the right amount to wake a town. Hooves struck the cobblestones, lamps lit up, shutters banged open, complaining shouts could be heard. Faces appeared at windows until, grumbling sleepily, they disappeared again. Damon wondered who had finally sounded the alarm. Had Nikay's put 2 and 2 together? Had Luron, emerging from his drugged stupor, decided he wanted his pet back? Had it been the Regent's guard? It didn't matter. The patrols were out, but they were loud and easy to avoid. It was not long before he was neatly ensconced on a rooftop, hidden between sloping tiles and chimney. He looked at the sky and judged it would be another hour, perhaps. Another scene break. The hour passed. One patrol was out of sight and earshot, the other was a few streets away, but retreating. Dawn began threatening from the wings. The sky was no longer perfectly black. Damon couldn't stay where he was, crouched like a gargoyle, waiting while the light slowly exposed him like a curtain rising on an unexpected tableau. Around him, the town was waking. It was time to get down. The alley was darker than the rooftop. He could make out several doorways of different shapes, the wood old, the stone moldings crumbling. Other than that, it had only a dead end piled with refuse. He preferred to get out of it. One of the doors opened. He smelled a waft of perfume and stale beer. There was a woman in the doorway. She had curly brown hair and a prettyish face from what he could see in the dark, and an ample chest partially exposed. Damon blinked. Behind her, the shadowy shape of a man, and behind that, warm light from red-covered lamps, a particular atmosphere and faint sounds that were unmistakable. Brothel. No hint of it on the outside, not even light coming from the shuttered windows. But if this act was a social taboo between unmarried men and women, it was understandable that a brothel be discreet, tucked out of sight. The man didn't seem to have any self-consciousness about what he'd been doing, exiting with the heavy body language of one recently sated, hefting his pants. When he saw Damon, he stopped and gave him a look of impersonal territorialism, and then he really stopped, and the look changed. And Damon's luck, which had so far held, deserted him in a rush. Gavar said, "Let me guess. I fucked one of yours, so you've come here to fuck one of mine." The distant sound of hooves on the cobblestones was followed by the sound of voices coming from the same direction, the cries that had woken the town a complaining hour ahead of schedule. "Or," said Gavar, in the slow voice of one who nevertheless gets there in the end, "are you the reason the guard's out?" Damon avoided the first swing, and the second. He kept a distance between their bodies, remembering Gavar's bear-like holds. The night was becoming an obstacle course of outlandish challenges. Stop an assassination, scale a wall, fight Gavar, what else? The woman, with her impressive half-unclothed lung capacity, opened her mouth and screamed. After that, things happened very quickly. 3 streets away, shouts and the clatter of hooves as the nearer patrol wheeled and made for the scream at full pelt. His only chance then was that they would miss the narrow opening of the alley. The woman realized this too and screamed again, then ducked inside. The brothel door slammed and was bolted. The alley was narrow and could not comfortably manage 3 horses abreast, but 2 was enough. As well as horses and torches, the patrol had crossbows. He couldn't resist unless he wished to commit suicide. Beside him, Gavar was looking smug. He perhaps hadn't realized that if the guard fired on Damon, he was going to be collateral damage. Somewhere behind the 2 horses, a man dismounted and came forward. It was the same soldier who had been in charge of the Regent's guard in Luron's apartments. More smugness. From the look on his face, being proven right about Damon had him extremely gratified. "On your knees," said the soldier in charge. Were they going to kill him here? If so, he would fight, though he knew, against this many men with crossbows, how the fight would end. Behind the soldier in charge, the mouth of the alley bristled like a pine with crossbow bolts. Whether they planned to do it or not, they would certainly kill him here if given a single reasonable excuse. Damon went, slowly, to his knees. It was dawn. The air had that still, translucent quality that came with sunrise, even in a town. He looked around himself. It wasn't a very pleasant alley. The horses didn't like it, more fastidious than the humans who lived there. He let a breath out. "I arrest you for high treason," said the soldier. "For your part in the plot to assassinate the crown prince. Your life is forfeit to the crown. The council has spoken." He had taken his chance, and it had led him here. He felt not fear, but the hard, tangled sensation between his ribs of freedom dangled before him, then snatched from his grasp. What rankled the most was that Luron had been right. "Tie his hands," said the soldier in charge, tossing a piece of thin rope to Gavar. Then he moved to one side, sword at Damon's neck, giving the men in range a clear shot with the bow. "Move and die," said the soldier in charge, which was an apt summary. Gavar caught the rope. If Damon was going to fight, he would have to do it now before his hands were tied. He knew that, even as his mind, trained to fighting, saw the clear line to the crossbows and the 12 men on horseback, and returned with no tactic that would do more than make a commotion and a dent. Perhaps a few dents. "The punishment for treason is death," said the soldier. In the moments before his sword lifted, before Damon moved, before the last desperate act played out in the filthy alley, there was another burst of hooves, and Damon had to force down a breath of disbelieving laughter, remembering the second half of the patrol, arriving now like an unnecessary flourish. Really, even Castor hadn't sent as many men against him as this. "Hold!" called a voice. And in the dawn light, he saw that the men reining in their horses were not wearing the red cloaks of the Regent's guard, but instead were turned out in blue and gold. "It's the bitches' pups," said the soldier in charge with total contempt. 3 of the prince's guard had forced their horses past the impromptu blockade and into the cramped space of the alley. Damon even recognized 2 of them. Jord in front on a bay gelding, and behind him the larger figure of Orlan. "You've got something of ours," said Jord. "The traitor," said the soldier in charge. "You've no rights here. Leave now, and I'll let you go peacefully back." "We're not the peaceful sort," said Jord. His sword was unsheathed. "We don't leave without the slave." "You defy council orders," said the soldier in charge. The soldier in charge, on foot, was left in the unenviable position of facing down 3 riders. It was a small alley, and Jord had his sword out. Behind him, the reds and the blues were about equal in numbers, but the soldier in charge didn't seem fazed. He said, "Drawing on the Regent's guard is an act of treason." In answer, with casual contempt, Orlan drew his sword. Instantly, metal flashed all along the ranks behind him. Crossbows bristled on both sides. Nobody breathed. Jord said, "The prince is before the council. Your orders are an hour old. Kill the slave and you'll be the next one with your head on the block." "That's a lie," said the soldier in charge. Jord pulled something out of a fold in his uniform and dangled it. It was a counselor's medallion. It swung on its chain in the torchlight, glinting gold as a starburst. Into the silence, Jord said, "Want to bet?" Oh, yes. That's a scene break. Whew, that whole fucking sequence. She's too good at this. Oh, God. Oh, yeah. "You must be the fuck of a lifetime," said Orlan just before he shoved Damon into the audience chamber where Luron stood alone, in front of the Regent and Council. It was the same diorama as last time, with the Regent enthroned and the Council in full dress, formidably arrayed alongside him, except that there were no courtiers thronging the chamber. It was just Luron, alone, facing them. Damon immediately looked to see which counselor was missing his medallion. It was Herode. Another shove. Damon's knees hit the carpet, which was red like the cloaks of the Regent's guard. He was right near a part of the tapestry where a boar was speared under a tree heavy with pomegranates. He looked up. "My nephew has argued for you very persuasively," said the Regent. And then, oddly echoing Orlan's words, "You must have hidden charm. Maybe it's your physique he finds so appealing. Or do you have other talents?" Luron's cold, calm voice. "Do you imply I take the slave into my bed? What a revolting suggestion. He's a brute soldier from Castor's army." Luron had assumed once again the intolerable self-possession and was dressed for a formal audience. He was not, as Damon had last seen him, languid and somnolent. Ooh, nice. Languid and somnolent-eyed, head tipped back against a wall. The handful of hours that had passed since Damon's escape was enough time for the drug to have passed from his system, probably. Though, of course, there was no way of telling how long Luron had been in this room arguing with the council. "Only a soldier, and yet you've described the bizarre circumstance in which 3 men broke into your chambers in order to attack him," said the Regent. He regarded Damon briefly. "If he doesn't lie with you, what was he doing in your private space so late at night?" The temperature, already cool, dropped sharply. "I don't lie in the cloying sweat of men from Achielos," said Luron. "Luron, if there has been an Achielan attack against you that you are concealing for some reason, we must and will know about it. The question is serious." So was my answer. I don't know how this interrogation found its way into my bed. May I ask where I can expect it to travel next? The heavy folds of a state robe swathed the throne on which the Regent sat. With the curve of a finger, he stroked the line of his bearded jaw. He looked again at Damon, before returning his attention to his nephew. "You wouldn't be the first young man to find himself at the mercy of a flush of new infatuation. Inexperience often confuses betting with love. The slave could have convinced you to lie to us for him, having taken advantage of your innocence." "Taken advantage of my innocence," said Luron. "We've all seen you favor him, seated beside you at table, fed by your own hand. Indeed, you've barely been seen without him the last few days." "Yesterday I brutalized him, Today I am swooning into his arms. I would prefer the charges against me to be consistent. Pick one. I don't need to pick one, nephew. You have a full range of vices, and inconsistency is the cap. Yes, apparently I have fucked my enemy, conspired against my future interests, and colluded in my own murder. I can't wait to see what feats I will perform next. It was only by looking at the counselors that you could see this interview had been going on a long time. Older men dragged out of their beds, they were all showing signs of weariness. And yet the slave ran, said the Regent. Are we back to this? Said Luron. There was no assault against me. If I'd been attacked by 4 armed men, do you really think I would have survived killing 3? The slave ran for no more sinister reason than that he is difficult and rebellious. I believe I have mentioned his intractable nature to you, all of you, before. You chose to disbelieve me then also. It isn't a question of belief. This defense of the slave bothers me. It isn't like you. It speaks to an uncharacteristic attachment. If he has led you to sympathize with forces outside your own country, sympathize with Achilleos. The cold disgust with which Luron said these words was more persuasive than any hot burst of outrage. 1 or 2 of the counselors shifted in place. Herod said, awkwardly, I hardly think he could be accused of that, not when his father and brother... No one, said Luron, has more reason to oppose Achilleos than I have. If Castor's gift slave had attacked me, it would be grounds for war. I would be overjoyed. I stand here for one reason only. The truth. You have heard it. I will not argue further. The slave is innocent or he is guilty. Decide. Before we decide, said the Regent, you will answer this. If your opposition towards Achilleos is genuine, as you maintain, if there is not some collusion, why do you continually refuse to do service on the border at Delphur? I think if you were as loyal as you claim, you would pick up your sword, gather what little there is of your honor, and do your duty. Aye, said Luron. The Regent sat back on the throne, spread his hands palm down on the dark carved wood of the curled armrests, and waited. I don't see why that should be... It was Audin who said, It is a contradiction. But one that's easily resolved, said Guillaume. Behind him there were 1 or 2 murmurs of assent. Councillor Herod slowly nodded. Luron passed his gaze over each member of the council. Anyone appraising the situation at that moment would have seen how precarious it was. The councillors were weary of this argument and ready to accept any solution that the Regent was offering, however artificial it might seem. Luron had only 2 options. Earn himself their censure by continuing a beleaguered wrangle mired in accusations and failure, or agree to border duty and get what he wanted. More than that, it was late, and human nature being what it was, if Luron did not agree to his uncle's offer, the councillors might turn on him simply for drawing this out further. And Luron's loyalty was in question now, too. Luron said, You're right, uncle. Avoiding my responsibilities has led you understandably to doubt my word. I will ride to Delphur and fulfill my duty on the border. I dislike the idea that there are questions about my loyalty. The Regent spread his hands in a pleased gesture. That answer must satisfy everyone, said the Regent. He received his agreement from the council, 5 verbal affirmations, given one after the other, after which he looked at Damon and said, I believe we can acquit the slave, with no more questions about loyalty. I humbly submit to your judgment, uncle, said Luron, and to the judgment of the council. Release the slave, the Regent ordered. Damon felt hands at his wrists, unbinding the rope. It was Orlan, who had been standing behind him this whole time. The motions were short jerks. There, it is done. Come, said the Regent to Luron, extending his right hand. On the smallest finger was his ring of office, gold, capped with a red stone, ruby or garnet. Luron came forward and knelt before him gracefully, a single kneecap to the floor. Kiss it, said the Regent, and Luron lowered his head in obedience to kiss his uncle's signet ring. His body language was calm and respectful. The fall of his golden hair hid his expression. His lips touched the hard red kernel of the gem without haste, then parted from it. He did not rise. The Regent gazed down at him. After a moment, Damon saw the Regent's hand lift again to rest in Luron's hair and stroke it with slow, familiar affection. Luron remained quite still, head bowed, as strands of fine gold were pushed back from his face by the Regent's heavy, ringed fingers. Luron, why must you always defy me? I hate it when we are at odds, yet you force me to chastise you. You seem determined to wreck everything in your path. Blessed with gifts, you squander them. Given opportunities, you waste them. I hate to see you grown up like this, said the Regent. When you were such a lovely boy. That's the end of the chapter. I would revisit an absolutely fucking diabolical seems to be the word of the day moment. Literally, what was it? 2 pages? Excuse me? 1, 2, 3. 3.5 pages before the end of this chapter. There was the moment when this happened, and the Regent said, the slave could have convinced you to lie to us for him, having taken advantage of your innocence. To where Luron says, repeats it, taken advantage of my innocence, said Luron. She's fucking... Now, we can have conversations about the Regent. It is a little bit after 4. So we're going to go ahead and take the break now. We're going to leave you there to absorb. And we're going to go to a nice place for a little bit as we head off to the Gaywatch break room. And I'm going to grab some more tea. And then we're going to come back and we're going to keep reading for the second half. Holy Jesus. I've been waiting to get here. I've been waiting to get here. So we'll come back after we regroup, so to speak. I'll be right back. And we're back with more Captive Prince. Henry wins comment of the day up here. Where did it go? Henry said, "The fireplace sounds are me setting the Regent on fire." You win. That was beautiful. Made me laugh out loud during the break when I saw that. Yeah, because that's exactly where the Regent can fucking die. Listen. I can go a bit plot blind whenever I am like reading or watching or absorbing any kind of story. If I'm, even remotely engrossed, it can be really difficult for me to actually try to like look down the road or see what's coming or anticipate anything really. I usually buy what a story is telling me like hook, line, and sinker. So I usually don't realize things until I'm supposed to realize them in the narrative, which is to say, when I first read this, did not see this coming. And in hindsight, really should have, because from the second that we found out that the Regent kept a 13-year-old boy as a pet and had been for like 3 years, that should have been on the table. But it wasn't in my brain. So I was fully knocked for a loop, as it were, by this. So just in case you were too, same. Could not... I'm pretty sure I actively threw the book at something at the time. The wall, my bet somewhere. I had to walk that one off. Yeah. I got, like, physically sick. I had that sinking pit in my stomach. I see, because we have a new spirit in the Gaywatch break room, I see that his name is Mau Mau? Y'all are hitting it out of the park with these names. That's the cutest shit I ever heard. I love it so much. Oh, that's adorable. So we're on page 215 for chapter 12. It's such a huge... This revelation about Luron is something that you can track going back through the first book. And the unveiling of the Regent as unbelievably nauseating villain, and the unfurling of this whole 4D chess thing that they have going on, and like the full context, is so beautifully done. It's a real like unveiling of exactly what the hell is going on at this court from the perspective of, a captured prince from a enemy country. Yeah, and then this whole thing with the Regent recontextualizes Luron's frigidness and adds a whole other possibilities in that regard. And just everything about Luron kind of more new questions are raised about Luron and what he's like and why he is the way he is. And also one of the most things for me is how it also recontextualizes Luron's strange dynamic with Nikay's, and why Luron seems to have the weird rapport with Nikay's that Luron does. It reframes just everything, as it should. Whew. Oh, yes, Wolf, good point. About clocking Luron when he was unsettled by Damon's refusal to, do Nikay's. Yeah, Luron's whole attitude and responses to a lot of things now become very understandable. The subtext is now screaming. Yeah. why his clothes take 30 minutes to unlace, why he's done up so completely and totally. Yeah. The blue eyes. I only caught the blue-eyed thing, like, literally in the pages leading up to it, where I realized, oh, fuck, because they described Nikay's with blue eyes, and I was like, motherfucker. But I couldn't say anything, because we hadn't gotten there yet. Oh, thank you, Couscous. Luron being frigid and not having lovers, but giving instructions on how to please a man perfectly. Yeah. It gets worse the more you think about it. Chapter 12. The rare moment of avuncular affection. God, avuncular. I dropped my pen on the floor and I can't get it, but avuncular is being written down for sure. The rare moment of avuncular affection ended the meeting, and the Regent and Council left the chamber. Luron remained, rising from where he knelt, watching his uncle and the councillors file out. Orlan, who had bowed his way out after releasing Damon from his bonds, was gone also. They were alone. Damon rose without thinking. He remembered after a second or two that he was supposed to wait for some sort of order from Luron, but by then it was too late. He was on his feet and the words were out of his mouth. "You lied to your uncle to protect me," he said. 6 feet of tapestried carpet lay between them. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. Or maybe he did. Luron's eyes narrowed. "Have I once again offended your high-minded principles? Perhaps you can suggest a more wholesome détente. I seem to recall telling you not to wander off." Damon could hear, distantly, the shock in his own voice. "I don't understand why you would do that to help me, when telling the truth would have served you far better. If you don't mind, I think I've heard enough about my character for one night. Or am I to go 12 rounds with you, too? I will." "No, I didn't mean..." What did he mean? He knew what he was supposed to say, gratitude from the rescued slave. It wasn't how he felt. He'd been so close. The only reason he'd been discovered at all was because of Gavar, who would not be his enemy if not for Luron. Thank you meant thank you for being dragged back to be shackled and tied up inside this cage of a palace. Again. Yet, unequivocally, Luron had saved his life. Luron and his uncle were close to being a match when it came to bloodless verbal brutality. Whew! Bloodless verbal brutality. A turn of phrase. Thank you. Damon had felt exhausted just listening to it. He wondered exactly how long Luron had stood his ground before he had been brought in. "I can't protect you as I am now," Luron had said. Damon hadn't thought about what protection might entail, but he would never have imagined that Luron would step into the ring on his behalf and stay in it. "I meant that I am grateful..." Luron cut him off. "There is nothing further between us. Certainly not thanks. Expect no future niceties from me. Our debt is clear." But the slight frown with which Luron regarded Damon was not wholly one of hostility. It accompanied a long, searching look. After a moment, "I meant it when I said I disliked feeling indebted to you. And then, you had far less reason to help me than I did to help you." "That's certainly true." "You don't prettify what you think, do you?" said Luron, still frowning. "A more artful man would. An artful man would have stayed put and won advantage by fostering the sense of obligation and guilt in his master." "I didn't realize you had a sense of guilt," said Damon, bluntly. An apostrophe appeared at one corner of Luron's lips. He moved a few steps away from Damon, touching the worked armrest of the throne with his fingertips, and then, in a sprawling, relaxed posture, he sat down on it. "Well, take heart. I am riding to Delphur, and we will be rid of each other. Why does the idea of border duty bother you so much? I'm a coward, remember?" Damon thought about that. "Are you? I don't think I've ever seen you shy away from a fight. More like the opposite." The apostrophe deepened. "True. Then," Luron said, "it doesn't concern you." Another pause. Luron's relaxed sprawl on the throne had a boneless quality, and Damon wondered, as Luron continued to gaze at him, whether the drug still lingered in his veins. When Luron spoke, the tone was conversational. How far did you get? Not far. A brothel somewhere in the southern quarter. Had it really been that long since Ansel? The gaze had taken on a lazy quality. Damon flushed. I wasn't there for pleasure. I did have one or two other things on my mind. Pity, said Luron in an indulgent tone. You should have taken your pleasure while you had the chance. I am going to lock you up so tightly you won't be able to breathe, let alone inconvenience me like this again. Of course, said Damon in a different voice. I told you you shouldn't thank me, said Luron. That's a scene break. And so they took him back into his small, familiar, over-decorated room. It had been a long, sleepless night, and he had a pallet and cushions on which to rest, but there was a feeling in his chest that prevented sleeping. As he looked around the room, the feeling intensified. There were 2 arched windows along the wall to his left, with low, wide sills, each covered with patterned grills. They looked out on the same gardens as Luron's loggia, which he knew from the position of his room in Luron's apartments, not from personal observation. His chain would not stretch far enough to give him a view. He could imagine below the tumbled water and cool greenery that characterized Varetian interior courtyards, but he could not see them. What he could see, he knew. He knew every inch of this room, every curl of the ceiling, every frond curve of the window grille. He knew the opposite wall. He knew the unmovable iron link in the floor and the drag of the chain and its weight. He knew the 12th tile that marked the limit of his movements when the chain pulled taut. It had all been exactly the same each and every day since his arrival, with a change only in the color of the cushions on the pallet, which were whisked in and out as though from some inexhaustible supply. Around mid-morning, a servant entered, bearing the morning meal, left him with it, and hastened away. The doors closed. He was alone. The delicate platter contained cheeses, warm flaking breads, a handful of wild cherries in their own shallow silver dish, a pastry artfully shaped. Each item was considered, designed, so that the display of food, like everything else, was beautiful. He threw it across the room in an expression of total violent, impotent rage. A scene break. He regretted this almost as soon as he'd done it. When the servant re-entered later and, white-faced with nerves, began creeping around the edges of the room picking up cheese, he felt ridiculous. Then, of course, Riddell had to enter and view the disorder, fixing Damon with a familiar look. Throw as much food as you like. Nothing will change. For the duration of the prince's stay at the border, you will not leave this room. The prince's orders. You will wash here and dress here and remain here. The excursions you have enjoyed to banquets, to hunts, and to the baths are ended. You will not be let off that chain. For the duration of the prince's stay at the border. Damon closed his eyes briefly. When does he leave? 2 days hence. How long will he be gone? Several months. It was incidental information to Riddell, who spoke the words oblivious to their effect on Damon. Riddell dropped a small pile of clothing onto the ground. Change. Damon must have shown some reaction in his expression because Riddell continued, The prince dislikes you in Varetian clothing. He ordered the offense remedied. They are clothes for civilized men. Ooh. He changed. He picked up the clothes Riddell had dropped from their little folded pile, not that there was much fabric to fold. It was back to slave garments. The Varetian clothing in which he'd escaped was removed by the servants as though it had never been. Time, excruciatingly, passed. That one brief glimpse of freedom made him ache for the world outside this palace. He was aware, too, of an illogical frustration. Escape, he had thought, would end in freedom or death, but whatever the outcome, it would make some kind of difference. Except now he was back here. How is it possible that all the fantastical events of last night had affected no change in his circumstances at all? The idea of being trapped inside this room for several months. Perhaps it was natural, trapped like a fly in this filigree web, that his mind should fixate on Luron, with his spider's brain under the yellow hair. Last night, Damon had not given much thought to Luron or the plot that centered on him. His mind had been filled with thoughts of escape. He'd had neither the time nor the inclination to muse on Varetian treachery. But now he was alone, with nothing to think about except the strange, bloody attack. And so, as the sun climbed its way from morning to afternoon, he found himself remembering the 3 men, with their Varetian voices and Achiellan knives. These 3 men attacked the slave, Luron had said. Luron needed no reason to lie, but why deny he'd been attacked at all? It helped the perpetrator. He remembered Luron's calculating cut with the knife, and the struggle after. Luron's body hard with resistance, the breath in his chest drug quickened. There were easier ways to kill a prince. 3 men armed with weapons from Sicyon. The Achiellan gift slave brought in to be blamed, the drug the planned rape, and Luron winnowing around talking, and lying, and killing. He understood. He felt momentarily as though the floor were sliding out from under him, the world rearranging itself. It was simple and obvious. It was something he should have seen straight away, would have seen if he had not been blinded by the need to escape. It lay before him, dark and consummate in design and intent. There was no way out of this room, so he had to wait, and wait, and wait, until the next gorgeous platter. He gave all his thanks that the silent servant was accompanied by Riddell. He said, "I have to talk to the prince." This is another scene break. The last time he had made a request like this, Luron had appeared promptly, in court clothes, with brushed hair. Damon expected no less now in these urgent circumstances, and he scrambled up from the pallet when the door was pushed open no more than an hour later. Into his room, alone, dismissing the guards, came the Regent. He entered with the slow, strolling walk of a lord touring his lands. This time there were no counselors, no retinue, no ceremony. The overwhelming impression remained one of authority. The Regent had an imposing physical presence, and his shoulders wore the robes well. The silver shot through his dark hair and beard spoke to his experience. He was not Luron, lounging idly on the throne. He was to his nephew as a war horse to a show pony. Damon made his obeisance. "Your Highness," he said. "You're a man. Stand," said the Regent. He did so, slowly. "You must be relieved that my nephew is leaving," said the Regent. It was not a good question to answer. "I'm sure he'll do honor to his country," said Damon. The Regent gazed at him. "You are quite diplomatic for a soldier." Damon took a steadying breath. This high, the air was thin. "Your Highness," he said, submissively. "I wait for a real answer," said the Regent. Damon made the attempt. "I'm glad he does his duty. A prince should learn how to lead men before he becomes a king." The Regent considered his words. "My nephew is a difficult case. Most men would think that leadership was a quality that ran naturally in the blood of a king's heir, not something that must be forced on him against his own flawed nature. But then, Luron was born a second son." "So were you," came the thought, unbidden. The Regent made Luron feel like a warm-up. He was not here for an exchange of views, whatever it might look like. For a man of his status to visit a slave at all was unlikely and bizarre. "Why don't you tell me what happened last night?" said the Regent. "Your Highness, you already have the story from your nephew." "Perhaps, in the confusion, there was something my nephew misunderstood or left out," said the Regent. "He is not used to fighting, as you are." Damon was silent, though the urge to speak dragged at him like an undertow. "I know your first instinct is to honesty," said the Regent. "You will not be penalized for it." Said Damon. There was movement in the doorway. Damon shifted his gaze, almost with a guilty start. "Uncle," said Luron. "Luron?" said the Regent. "Do you have some business with my slave?" "Not business," said the Regent. "Curiosity." Luron came forward with the twinned deliberation and disinterest of a cat. It was impossible to tell how much he had overheard. "He isn't my lover," said Luron. "I'm not curious about what you do in bed," said the Regent. "I'm curious about what happened in your rooms last night." Just gotta breathe. Hadn't we settled that? Half settled. We never heard the slave's account. Surely, said Luron, you wouldn't value a slave's word over mine. Wouldn't I? Said the Regent. Even your tone of surprise is feigned. Your brother could be trusted. Your word is a tarnished rag. But you can rest easy. The slave's account matches yours as far as it goes. Did you think there was some deeper plot here? Said Luron. They gazed at each other. The Regent said, I only hope your time on the border will improve and focus you. I hope you will learn what you need as the leader of other men. I don't know what else I can teach you. You keep offering me all these chances to improve myself, said Luron. Teach me how to thank you. Damon expected the Regent to reply, but he was silent, his eyes on his nephew. Will you come see me off tomorrow, Uncle? Luron, you know I will, said the Regent. That's another scene break. Well, said Luron when his uncle had left. The steady blue gaze was on him. If you ask me to rescue a kitten from a tree, I'm going to refuse. I don't have a petition. I just wanted to speak with you. Fond goodbyes. I know what happened last night, said Damon. Luron said, Do you? It was the tone he used with his uncle. Damon drew a breath. So do you. You killed the survivor before he could be interrogated, said Damon. Luron moved to the window and sat, arranging himself on the sill. His pose was side saddle. The fingers of one hand slid idly into the ornate grill work that covered the window. The last of the day's sunlight lay on his hair and face like bright coins, shaped by the fretted openings. He gazed at Damon. Yes, Luron said. You killed him because you didn't want him interrogated. You knew what he was going to say. You didn't want him to say it. After a moment, yes. I assume he was to say that Castor sent him. The scapegoat was Achillean, and the weapons were Achillean. Every detail had been carefully arranged to throw the blame southward. For verisimilitude, the assassins would also have been told they were agents of Achilleos. Better for Castor to have friend uncle on the throne than nephew prince who hates Achilleos, said Luron. Except that Castor can't afford war now, not with dissent among the Karoi. If he wanted you dead, he'd do it secretly. He'd never send assassins like this, crudely armed with Achillean weapons announcing their provenance. Castor didn't hire those men. No, agreed Luron. He'd known, but to hear it was another matter, and the confirmation sent a shock down into him. In the warmth of the late afternoon, he felt himself turn cold. Then, war was the aim, he said. A confession like that, if your uncle heard it, he would have no choice but to retaliate. If you'd been found, this part he does not say, raped by an Achillean slave, murdered by Achillean knives. Before he resumed speech. Someone is trying to provoke war between Achilleos and Ver. You have to admire it, said Luron in a detached voice. It's the perfect time to attack Achilleos. Castor is dealing with factional problems from the Kairoi. Damianos, who turned the tide at Marlis, is dead, and the whole of Ver would rise up against a bastard, especially one who had cut down a Veretian prince. If only my murder weren't the catalyst. It's a scheme I would wholeheartedly support. Damon stared at him, his stomach churning in distaste at the casual words. He ignored them, ignored the final honey-eyed tones of regret. Because Luron was right. The timing was perfect. Pit a galvanized Ver against a fractured, feuding Achilleos, and his country would fall. Worse, it was the northern provinces that were unstable, Delpha, Sicyon, the very provinces that lay closest to the Veretian border. Achilleos was a powerful military force when the Kairoi were united under a single king, but if that bond dissolved, it was no more than a collection of city-states with provincial armies, none of which could stand against a Veretian attack. In his mind's eye he saw the future, the long train of Veretian troops moving southward, the provinces of Achilleos falling one by one. He saw Veretian soldiers streaming through the palace at Ios, Varetian voices echoing in his father's hall. He looked at Luron. Your welfare hinges on this plot, if only for your own sake. Don't you want it stopped? I have stopped it, said Luron. The astringent blue gaze was resting on him. I meant, said Damon, can't you put aside whatever family quarrel you have and speak honestly to your uncle? He felt Luron's surprise, transmitting itself through the air outside. Outside, the light was just beginning to turn orange. I don't think that would be wise, said Luron. Why not? Because, said Luron, the murderer is my uncle. It's the end of the chapter. Once again, Damon figured out 90% of it, because he's not an idiot. But the level of, unbelievableness from the Regent is not something that he fathoms. Because as you will note at the end of the previous chapter, we, the reader, were given the indication of the Regent's violation of Luron. Damon has not had such a realization. Damon does not know, which is a big thing to keep in mind. So Damon does not have the same level of not just suspicion, but he just doesn't go to that level of depravity. He just simply doesn't, which is one of the reasons why he can struggle in Vare, of all places, that frequently does go to that level of depravity. So, he hasn't made a total idiot of himself in Vare. He catches on, but not fast enough, at least for Luron and the 4D chess that he has going with the Regent. It's not quite fast enough. He gets there eventually, but by then, the Regent and Luron are already 10 steps ahead. It was a very, very skilled way to have a character who you still perceive as he's smart, he's capable, but he's still outmatched. We talked about this a little bit before, and this just goes right into that. We are on page 229 for chapter 13. Hang on a moment. Let me see. Okay, cool. There are... Oh, shit! No way! Oh my god, this is shorter than what I thought! Holy shit. Okay. Oh, fuck me. Alright. So we're actually just one chapter away from the end of the book. And it's not that terribly long. And then there's also a short story about Erasmus, which of course we would not have time to get into. So, I'll have to figure out how we get the training of Erasmus in there. I might stall the Erasmus short story until we get to the short stories at the end. I'll have to check and see, because I don't remember this short story well enough to be able to tell where it goes. But since it is 4:46, we're going to finish the book today, apparently. Damn. Which means we start the second book on Thursday. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, stall the short stories. That's kind of what I was going to do, because there would be no smooth way to read this and start the second book, in the same stream. That would be kind of messy a little bit. So, yeah, we will get to the short story for this book when we're done with the trilogy and reading Summer Palace, I believe, which is a collection of short stories. So, chapter 13 for page 229. But if that's true, Damon began. It was true. It was somehow not even a surprise, more like a truth that had grown for some time on the edge of his awareness, now brought into sharp relief. He thought, 2 thrones for the price of a few hired swords and a dose of pleasure drug. He remembered Nikay's appearing in the hallway with his huge blue eyes, wearing bedclothes. You can't go to Delphur, Damon said. It's a death trap. The moment he said it, he understood that Luron had always known this. He recalled Luron avoiding border duty again, and again, and again. You'll forgive me if I don't take tactical advice from a slave, scant moments after he is dragged back from a failed attempt to escape. You can't go. It's just a matter of staying alive. You forfeit the throne as soon as you set foot outside the city. Your uncle will hold the capital. He is already... Casting his mind back over the Regent's actions, Damon saw the series of moves that had led to this, each one played out precisely and far in advance. He has already cut off your supply lines through Varennes and Marsh. You don't have finances or troops. The words were an unfolding realization. It was clear now why Luron had worked to exonerate his slave and obfuscate the attack. If war was declared, Luron's life expectancy would be even shorter than it was going to be in Delphur. To actually ride out to the border with a company of his uncle's men was madness. Why are you doing this? Is it a forced move? You can't think of a way around it? Damon searched Luron's face. Is your reputation so far in the dirt that you think the council will choose your uncle for the throne anyway, unless you prove yourself? You are right on the edge of what I will allow from you, said Luron. Take me with you to Delphur, said Damon. No. Achielos is my country. Do you think I want her overrun by your uncle's troops? I will do anything in my power to prevent war. Take me with you. You will need someone you can trust. Speaking those last words, he almost winced, immediately regretting them. Luron had asked him for trust last night, and he had thrown the words back in his face. He would receive the same treatment. Luron just gave him a blankly curious look. Why would I need that? Damon stared at him, suddenly aware that if he asked, do you think you can juggle attempts on your life, military command, and your uncle's tricks and traps by yourself, the answer was going to be yes. I would have thought, said Luron, that a soldier like you would be quite happy to see Castor dethroned, after all he's done to you. Why not side with the Regency against him, and against me? I'm sure my uncle has approached you to spy for him on very generous terms. He has. Remembering the banquet, he asked me to bed you, then report back to him. Damon was forthright. Not in those words. And your answer? That, unreasonably, annoyed him. If I'd bedded you, you'd know it. There was a dangerous, narrow-eyed pause. Eventually, yes, your style of grabbing your partner and kicking their legs open does stand out in the memory. That isn't... Damon set his jaw, in no mood to get drawn into one of Luron's infuriating exchanges. I'm an asset. I know the region. I will do whatever it takes to stop your uncle. He looked into the impersonal blue gaze. I've helped you before. I can again. Use me however you will. Just take me with you. You're hot to help me. The fact that we ride towards Achielos factors in your request. Not at all. Damon flushed. You will have one more person standing between you and your uncle. Isn't that what you want? My dear brute, said Luron, I want you to rot here. Damon heard the metallic sound of the chained links before he realized that he had jerked against his restraints. They were Luron's parting words, spoken with relish. Luron had turned for the door. You can't leave me here while you ride off into your uncle's trap. There's more than your life at stake. The words were harsh with frustration. They had no effect. He could not prevent Luron leaving. Damon swore. Are you that sure of yourself? Damon called after him. I think if you could beat your uncle on your own, you would have done it already. Ooh, oh, oh. Luron stopped in the doorway. Damon saw the cupped yellow of his head, the straight line of his back and shoulders, but Luron didn't turn back to face him. The hesitation only lasted for a moment before he continued out the door. Damon was left to jerk once more, painfully, at the chains, alone. That's a scene break. Oh, shit. Oh, I love Damon. I love him so much. Oh, man. Oh, shit. entirely forgot about Damon's own sense of, sharp tongue. Holy shit. Luron's apartments filled with the sounds of preparation, the hallways busy, men tramping to and fro in the delicate garden below. It was no small task to arrange an armed expedition in 2 days. Everywhere there was activity. Everywhere except here, in Damon's rooms, where the only knowledge of the mission came from the sounds outside. Luron was leaving tomorrow. Luron, infuriating, intolerable Luron, was pursuing the worst possible course, and there was nothing Damon could do to stop him. The Regent's plans were impossible to guess. Damon had frankly no idea why he had waited as long as he had to move against his nephew. Was Luron simply lucky that the Regent's ambitions spanned 2 kingdoms? The Regent could have dispensed with his nephew years ago, with little fuss. It was easier to blame the death of a boy on mischance than that of a young man about to ascend the throne. Oh, the way that question answers itself. Oh. Oh, God, it just gets... Damon could see no reason why boy Luron should have escaped that fate. Perhaps familial loyalty had held the Regent back, until Luron had blossomed into poisonous maturity, sly-natured, and unfit to rule. If that was the case, Damon felt a certain amount of empathy with the man. Luron could inspire homicidal tendencies simply by breathing. Oh! That's not even the half of it. That's not even the fucking half of the kind of, cruel, dramatic irony that we're fucking in for, let me tell you. Let me just tease the rest of the trilogy for a second. You have no idea. It was a family of vipers. Castor, he thought, had no idea what lay across the border. Castor had embraced an alliance with Ver. He was vulnerable, ill-equipped to fight a war, the bonds within his own country showing cracks to which a foreign power had only to apply pressure. The Regent must be stopped, Achielos must be rallied, and for that, Luron must survive. It was impossible. Stuck here, Damon was powerless to act, and whatever cunning Luron possessed was neutralized by the arrogance that prevented him from grasping how completely his uncle had him outmatched once he left the capital to go traipsing across the countryside. Did Luron really believe he could do this alone? Luron would need every weapon at his disposal in order to navigate this course alive, yet Damon had not been able to persuade him of that. He was aware, not for the first time, of a fundamental inability to communicate with Luron. It was not only that he was navigating a foreign language, it was as though Luron was an entirely other species of animal. He had nothing but the stupid hope that somehow Luron would change his mind. The sun slid slowly across the sky outside. Beautiful alliteration, holy shit. And in Damon's locked chamber, the shadows cast by the furniture moved in a dawdling semicircle. It happened in the hours before dawn the next morning. He woke to find servants in his room, and Riddell, the overseer, who never slept. What is it? Is there some word from the prince? He pushed himself up, one arm braced among the cushions, hand fisting in silk. He felt himself being manhandled before he was fully upright. The hands of the servants on him, and instinct almost shrugged them off, until he realized they were unlocking his restraints. The chain ends fell with a muffled chink into the cushions. Yes, change, said Riddell, and dropped a bundle unceremoniously down onto the floor beside him, much as he had done the night before. Damon felt the thudding of his heart as he looked down at it. Veretian clothing. It was a clear message. The long, drawn-out frustration of the last day meant that he almost couldn't absorb it, couldn't trust it. He bent slowly to pick the clothes up. The pants resembled those he had found in the training arena, but were very soft and very fine, of a quality well beyond that of the threadbare pair he had hurried into that night. The shirt was made to fit. The boots looked like riding boots. He looked back at Riddell. Well, change, said Riddell. He put a hand to the fastening at his waist and felt a bemused curve tug at his mouth as Riddell somewhat awkwardly averted his eyes. Riddell only interrupted once. "No, not like that," and shooed his hands away, gesturing for a servant to step forward and retie some idiotic piece of lacing. "Are we—" Damon began as the last lace was tied to Riddell's satisfaction. "The prince ordered you brought down into the courtyard, dressed to ride. You'll be fitted for the rest there." The rest, dryly. He looked down on himself. It was already more clothing than he had worn at any one time since his capture in Achielos. Riddell didn't answer, just made a sharp gesture for him to follow. After a moment, Damon did, feeling a strange awareness of the lack of restraints. The rest, he'd asked. He did not think much about that as they wound their way through the palace to emerge in an outer courtyard near the stables. Even if he had, he would not have come up with the answer. It was so unlikely that it simply didn't occur to him until he saw with his own eyes, and even then he almost didn't believe it. He almost laughed aloud. The servant who came forward to meet them had his arms full of leather, straps and buckles, and some larger hardened leather pieces, the largest with chest moldings. It was armor. It's a scene break. The courtyard by the stables was filled with the activity of servants and armorers, stable boys and pages, the shout of orders, the chinking sounds of saddlery. Punctuating these was the discharge of breath through equine nostrils and the occasional strike of a hoof against paving. Damon recognized several faces. There were the men who had guarded him in stony-faced twos throughout his confinement. There was the physician who had tended his back, now out of his floor-length robes and dressed for riding. There was Jord, who had waved Herod's medallion in the alleyway and saved his life. He saw a familiar servant ducking riskily under the belly of one of the horses on some errand, and across the courtyard he caught a glimpse of a man with a black mustache, who he knew from the hunt as a horsemaster. The pre-dawn air was cool, but soon it would warm. The season was ripening from spring into summer, a good time for a campaign. In the south, of course, it would be hotter. He flexed his fingers and deliberately straightened his back, let the feeling of freedom sink down into him, a powerful physical sensation. He was not particularly thinking of escape. He would, after all, be riding with a contingent of heavily armed men, and besides, there was now another urgent priority. For now it was enough that he was unshackled and outside in the open air, and that very soon the sun would rise, warming leather and skin, and they would mount up and ride. It was light riding armor, with enough non-essential decoration that he took it to be parade armor. The servant told him, yes, they would properly equip a chastillon. His fitting took place by the stable doors, near to a water pump. The last buckle was tightened. Then, startlingly, he was given a sword belt. Even more startlingly, he was given a sword to put in it. It was a good sword. Under the decoration, it was good armor, though not what he was used to. It felt foreign. He touched the starburst pattern at his shoulder. He was dressed in Luron's colors and bearing his insignia. That was a strange feeling. He had never thought he would ride out under a Varetian banner. Riddell, who had departed on some errand, now returned to give him a list of duties. Damon listened with part of his mind. He was to be a functional member of the company. He would report to his ranking senior, who would report to the captain of the guard, who would in turn report to the prince. He was to serve and obey as any man. He would also have the additional duties of attendant. In that capacity, he would report directly to the prince. The duties described to him seemed to be a mixture of man-at-arms, adjutant, and bed-slave, ensuring the prince's safety, attending to his personal comfort, sleeping in his tent. Damon's whole attention swung back to Riddell. Sleeping in his tent? Where else? He passed a hand over his face. Luron had agreed to this. The list continued. Sleeping in his tent, carrying his messages, attending to his needs. He would be paying for any relative freedom with a period of enforced proximity to Luron. With the other part of his mind, Damon surveyed the activity in the courtyard. It was not a large group. When you looked past the ruckus, it was the supplies for perhaps 50 men armed to the teeth, at most 75, more lightly armed. Those he recognized were Prince's Guard. The majority of them, at least, would be loyal. Not all of them. This was Vare. Damon drew in a breath and let it out, looking at each of the faces and wondering which of them had been coaxed or coerced into the employ of the Regent. How the taint of this place had sunk down into his bones. He was certain betrayal would come. He was only unsure from where. He thought logistically about what it would take to ambush and slaughter this number of men. It would not be discreet, but it would also not be difficult. At all. "This can't be everyone," said Damon. He spoke to Jord, who had come to splash his face with some water from the nearby pump. It was his first concern. Too few men. "It isn't. We ride to Chastillon, form up with the Regent's men stationed there," said Jord, adding, "Don't get your hopes up. It's hardly much more than this." "Not enough to make a dent in a real battle. Enough for the Regent's men to outnumber the princes several to one," was Damon's guess. "Yes," said Jord, shortly. He looked at Jord's dripping face, the set of his shoulders. He wondered if the Prince's Guard knew what they were facing. Outright treachery at worst, and at best months on the road, subject to the rule of the Regent's men. The thin line of Jord's mouth suggested that they did. Damon said, "I owe you my thanks for the other night." Jord gave him a steady look. "I was following orders. The Prince wanted you back alive like he wants you here. I just hope he knows what he's doing with you and that he's not like the Regent says, distracted by his first taste of cock." After a long moment, Damon said, "Whatever else you think, I don't share his bed." It was not a new insinuation. Damon wasn't sure why it rankled so much now. Perhaps because of the uncanny speed with which the Regent's speculations had spread from the audience chamber to the guard. The rewording smacked of Orleans. "However you've turned his head, he sent us right to you. I won't ask how he knew where to find me." "I didn't send them after you," said the cool, familiar voice. "I sent them after the Regent's Guard, who were making enough racket to raise the dead, the drunk, and those without ears." "Your Highness," said Jord, red. Damon turned. "If I'd sent them after you," said Luron, "I would have told them you went out the only way you knew, through the courtyard off the northern training area. Did you?" "Yes," said Damon. The pre-dawn light bleached Luron's hair from gold to something paler and finer. The bones of his face appeared as delicate as the calamus of a feather. He was relaxed against the doorway of the stables as though he'd been there quite a while, which would explain the color of Jord's face. He must have come not indolently from the direction of the palace, but from the stables, long up, attending to some other matter. He was dressed for the day in riding leathers, the severity of which ruthlessly canceled out any effect of the fragile light. Damon had half expected a gaudy parade costume, but Luron had always defined himself against the opulence of the court, and he did not need gilt to be recognized under a parade standard, only the uncovered bright of his hair. Luron paced forward. His eyes passed over Damon in turn, displaying jagged distaste. Seeing him in armor seemed to have drawn something unpleasant from the depths. "Too civilized?" "Hardly," said Luron. About to speak, Damon caught sight of Gavar's familiar form. Immediately he stiffened. "What is he doing here?" "Captaining the guard." "What?" "Yes, it's an interesting arrangement, isn't it?" said Luron. "You should throw him a pet to keep him off the men," said Jord. "No," said Luron, after a moment. He said it thoughtfully. "I'll tell the servants to sleep with their legs closed," said Jord. "And Imeric," said Luron. Jord gave a snort. Damon, who didn't know the man in question, followed Jord's eyes to one of the soldiers on the far side of the courtyard. Brown hair, reasonably young, reasonably attractive. Imeric. "Speaking of pets," said Luron in a different voice. Jord bowed his head and moved off, his part done. Luron had noticed the small figure on the periphery of the activity. Nikay, wearing a simple white tunic, his face free of paint, had come out into the courtyard. His arms and legs were bare, his feet in sandals. He picked his way towards them until he faced Luron, and then he just stood there, looking up. His hair was a careless tumble. Under his eyes were the faintest shadows, mark of a sleepless night. Luron said, "Come to see me off?" "No," said Nikay. He held out something to Luron, the gesture peremptory and full of repugnance. "I don't want it. It makes me think of you." Blue, limpid, twin sapphires dangled from his fingers. It was the earring he'd worn to the banquet, and which he'd lost spectacularly in a bet. Nikay held it away from himself as though it was made of something fetid. Luron took it without saying anything. He tucked it carefully into a fold of his riding clothes. Then after a moment he reached out and touched Nikay's chin with one knuckle. "You look better without all the paint," said Luron. It was true. Without the paint, Nikay's beauty was like an arrow shaft to the heart. He had something of that in common with Luron, but Luron possessed the confident, developed looks of a young man entering his prime, while Nikay's was the epicene beauty peculiar to young boys of a certain age, short-lived, unlikely to survive adolescence. "Do you think a compliment will impress me?" said Nikay. "It won't. I get them all the time." "I know you do," said Luron. "I remember the offer you made me. Everything you said then was a lie. I knew it was," said Nikay. "You're leaving." "I'm coming back," said Luron. "Is that what you think?" Damon felt the hair rise all over his body. He remembered again Nikay's in the hallway after the attempt on Luron's life. He resisted with difficulty the urge to crack Nikay's open and spill all his secrets out from inside. "I'm coming back," said Luron. "To keep me as a pet?" said Nikay. "You'd love that, to make me your servant." Dawn passed over the courtyard. Colors changed. A sparrow landed on one of the stable posts close by him, but lifted off again at the sound of one of the men dropping an armful of tack. "I would never ask you to do anything you found distasteful," said Luron. "Looking at you is distasteful," said Nikay. That was another scene break. There was no loving goodbye between uncle and nephew, only the impersonal ritual of public ceremony. It was a spectacle. The Regent was in full robes of state, and Luron's men were turned out with perfect discipline. Lined and polished, they stood arrayed in the outer courtyard, while the Regent at the top of wide steps received his nephew. It was a morning of warm, breathless weather. The Regent pinned some sort of jeweled badge of office to Luron's shoulder, then urged him to rise and kissed him calmly on both cheeks. When Luron turned back to face his men, the clasp on his shoulder winked in the sunlight. Damon felt almost dizzy as the full sense memory of a long-ago fight took him. Auguste had worn that same badge on the field. Luron mounted. Banners furled out around him in a series of starbursts, blue and gold. Trumpets blared and Gavar's horse kicked, despite its training. It was not only courtiers who were here to watch, but commoners crowding near the gate. The scores of people who had turned out to see their prince made a wall of approving sound. It didn't surprise Damon that Luron was popular with the townspeople. He looked the part, all bright hair and astonishing profile. A golden prince was easy to love if you did not have to watch him picking wings off flies. Straight-backed and effortless in the saddle, he had an exquisite seat when he was not killing his horse. Damon, who had been given a horse as good as his sword in a place in the formation close by Luron, kept his place as they rode out. But as they passed beyond the inner walls, he could not resist turning in his seat and looking back at the palace that had been his prison. It was beautiful, the tall doors, the domes and towers, and the endless, intricate, interwoven patterns carved into the creamy stone. Alight with marble and polished metal, stretching themselves up to the sky were the curving roof spires that had hidden him from the sight of guards during his attempt to escape. He was not insensible to the irony of his situation, riding out to protect the man who had done all he could to grind him under his heel. Luron was his jailer, dangerous and malicious. Luron was as likely to rake Achilleos with his claws as his uncle. None of that mattered before the urgency of stopping the machinery of the Regent's plans. If it was the only way to prevent war or postpone it, then Damon would do whatever was necessary to keep Luron safe. He had meant that. But having passed out of the walls of the Venetian palace, he knew one thing more. Whatever he had promised, he was leaving the palace behind him, and he did not intend, ever, to come back. He returned his eyes to the road and the first part of his journey, south and home. Damn. And that's the end of book fucking 1 of the Captive Prince trilogy. Jesus. She really knows how to put a little end moment, doesn't she? Fuck. Oh, shit. man. I'm so excited. It's wild to me with how many trilogies and how many series are out there. You know, you always hear about, oh, this was the best volume and this one kind of sucked, or this one was a little weak, but it really picks up after that, etc., etc. Nah, every single volume, all three, it is a banger from start to finish in such markedly different ways. The things going on in the first book is totally different from the things going on in the second, is totally different from the things going on in the third. I don't know. I've studied it and I still don't know how she did it, frankly. I mentioned this before, but I did, the first time I finished this book, I really was like, how does she turn this around? How could this possibly become a romance, giving everything that's happened and everything that has happened specifically with the things that have happened to Damon? And you just have to trust her, is all I'll say. You just have to trust her. And I've said it once and I'll say it again. If you've only read the first book of Captive Prince, you have not read Captive Prince. So depending on where you're sitting in terms of your comfort level, I know it sounds incredible, because it sounded incredible to me way back when I first read this, but you do have to trust her. Or at the very least, you know, if you know that your sensibilities about this kind of thing more align with mine, then you can trust me in lieu of trusting her, if you're new to C.S. Picot. The second book, which is called Prince's Gambit, we start on Thursday, apparently. I thought we weren't going to start it till next week, but here we are. And while we read that, we'll be giving away another copy of this first book, right? But with the pretty cover that I forgot to bring over here, with the prettier cover. We'll be giving away a second copy of that. Shit, it's after 5. I have to go. God, that's the problem, is that I could talk about Captive Prince all freaking day, and we don't have the time. So I'll see if I can figure out a way to fix that. But for now, we'll come back on Thursday, all ready for Prince's Gambit. You need to just read it in my face, because I can't say things. I can't. You have now gotten a glimpse, at least, of the type of... I swear to God, this is like some of the cruelest irony I've ever encountered in a series. Us knowing what the Regent did to Luron, but not Damon, is so brutal. It has been my go-to reference for dramatic irony ever since I first read this trilogy. Because it does not, it simply doesn't get crueler than that. At least not for me. I think there may have been a couple of other times where I've seen dramatic irony really, really played perfectly, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Whereas whenever it comes up, I immediately reference Captive Prince. And you can see why. Anyway, I have to go. I love you very, very much. I hope you are enjoying Captive Prince so far. Please let me know down in the comments what you're thinking, how it's going for you in your brain if you've never read this before, like what you're currently thinking right now. I would love to hear it. And the thing, I used to be able to scroll all the way back up through chat to see what everyone's saying kind of as things are happening, but I can't do that anymore. It stops after a certain amount, and not very much. So if you're having particularly like screamy feelings like you might be, please leave that in a comment on this live stream, because once it ends, it gets posted. So also please like it. If you had a good time, if you liked this book, if this is brand new and you really loved things, you know, about it, please give this stream a like, help out the channel, and all that lovely stuff. I will see you on Thursday at the same time, 3 p.m. to start Prince's Gambit. Oh, and in the meantime, I hope you have a lovely week, and I hope you take care of yourself. Alrighty? I'll see you in a couple of days.